and welcome back to another episode of Screen Tested. I am your host Tyrant, and in today's episode we're taking another look at the BATLETH. Now this might be a little bit of a surprise to you because obviously recently we did a full episode on the BATLETH. I highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already, especially before watching this one, because a lot of the things that I said in that first episode haven't changed. Now obviously the BATLETH is from the Star Trek series. I'm sure you guys know this. It's the Sword of Honor, is the ritualistic weapon of the Klingons. It weighs around 5 kilos, at least that's what they say, and I think it's one of the most recognizable pop culture weapons. It's really cool. I like the BATLETH. So if today's episode was a little bit of a happy accident, if we want to call it that, what was the catalyst? Well, this BATLETH here I recently built for my collection. This is not the same BATLETH that we used in the episode 1. This is a brand new one that I made, and we're going to get into the build in a minute, but I made a very small change that foundationally changed the BATLETH. So before we get into that, let's get to the build footage. Let's see how we made it. It was very straightforward, but let's get to it anyway. The first thing I did was find the biggest piece of aluminum flat plate that I could, in its thickest as well, and I laid out a template. Now this particular template I found online. I just looked for something that was as accurate as possible to the show, and I really liked this one. So I used a marker, just laid out the template, then I busted out the angle grinder and started cutting away. A lot of cutting, a lot of grinding. This sucked. I didn't want to do this, but obviously this is something that I really wanted to add to my collection, so here we are. After I'd cut away the bulk of the material, I then was able to, switch over to a grinding disc and, grind away a lot of those hard edges. Now, because it is aluminum, it is a little easier to grind, especially compared to something like steel, but it is quite thick. Now, because the BATLETH has a whole bunch of really complex curves, there are some areas that the grinder can't get into, so I'm just going to use some hand files for that. It does take a little bit longer, but it is nice to break up the pace of just a lot of grinding. A lot of grinding. Now the next part of the build I didn't film because it was very tedious and took a long time. I had a lot of trouble figuring out how I was going to cut out the hand holes, and I decided the best way to go about it was to drill a whole bunch of little holes all the way around the perimeter and then cut in between with the grinder and start smashing them away with the hammer. It worked really well. Obviously I didn't want to cut into the BATLETH or anything like that. It's like when you try and cut a piece of paper, a circle out of a piece of paper, but a lot harder. This technique did work really well in the end, but it just took so long. It was such a tedious process. Such a tedious process. I don't know how many drill holes there are, but if somebody wants to pause the video and count them and leave the number in the comments of how many holes I had to drill, I would find that amusing. Now we're getting into the home stretch. All that's left is to refine the shape, take down any hard edges, grind in bevels and that sort of thing. Use the belt sander and the grinder for this, of course. And last but not least, we need to wrap the handles in some nice leather. So I grabbed a little bit of hide, cut it up with some scissors, put some foam in between just to bulk the handles out a little bit, extra like we did last time, and then wrapped the leather around. And with all that out of the way, let's get to the B-roll and let's see how this thing handles, especially compared to the original BATLETH. So this is the second BATLETH ready to go. I mean, relatively speaking, of course. And let's talk about what is different between this BATLETH and the previous BATLETH, because when I show you them side by side, you're gonna see exactly what it is. So this one here is the original BATLETH, and this is the new BATLETH. Let me see if I can line them up. It is much smaller. Now the reason why this is something that I discovered by accident is because when I was making this one for my collection, a replica one, getting the right size material this big with it's a huge piece, super expensive, really hard to actually find, especially in the appropriate thicknesses, blah, 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 right? So I ended up getting it a little bit smaller because I thought this is a perfect length regardless, right? And that was the accident that led to today's episode, because doing a follow-up, most things are still, relatively speaking, exactly the same. However, because it's shorter, there is a whole bunch of positives now. First and foremost is obviously the weight reduction. This is really quick and nimble, right? Not only is it really quick and nimble, you can effectively use it in one hand. And because this curve is far more accurate than this curve, as you can see, this one is a little bit more straight, which I complained about in the first episode. Because it's a lot more curved, it means things like flick cuts and getting around people's guards is a whole lot more plausible and like more effective, right? There's also the added benefit that because you can wield it in one hand, it means that you can not only move it a lot faster, you can do some tricky things like reverse edge strikes. Like with the other one, it's just too heavy, right? But with this one, just say I did a primary strike, I can sort of, I want to be careful how I phrase this, kind of thumb the blade to come back over for a reverse edge strike. Now obviously there's the detriment that when you're slicing with a blade this predominantly curved, you're slicing away from your target, which obviously isn't ideal, very similar to the Leopa. But what it means is that you can effectively do primary and secondary strikes, which makes this thing a lot more useful. So we've got weight reduction, size reduction, speed and dexterity have all been improved by slightly making it a little bit smaller. Now, we still have some of the detriments of the range, right? Fighting other weapons at range really isn't ideal because it's just not that long. But think of it this way. We've gained speed, we've gained that dexterity, and we've traded some of that reach, but I'll explain why that might not be a complete terrible idea in a minute. One of the bigger benefits is we haven't really lost any of the grappling ability, right? This right here is what tips the scales. This is a buckler, specifically a Talhofer buckler. This is my buckler. It's awesome. I really like it, right? I can use something in my offhand in addition to the BATLETH. All of a sudden, this becomes a complete... If you're enjoying today's episode, you really should consider subscribing. Here on the channel, we do a whole bunch of cool shit, specifically like this, a fire sword. So if you like this sort of content, you should stick around. All of a sudden you can have something in your offhand like a shield or a buckler. I would personally think a buckler for this particular type of gnarly situation is super, like this is what I would go with, right? Specifically a buckler that is also very aggressive, which is why I chose this one for this particular point, right? But you can still absolutely use the buckler with it. Because what we've done is we've essentially turned the BATLETH into an arming sword length. It might be a little bit shorter, but relatively speaking, you can now use something in your offhand, which with the BATLETH, the main BATLETH, this is just way too heavy. This though, now obviously it's aluminum, so it's a little bit lighter, but even if it was steel, it would still be completely a viable technique, right? So you can use something in your offhand. That's something that I thought was absolutely really cool, right? The range we're still gonna struggle with, no matter what. The BATLETH design just doesn't lend itself to range, which is fine. A lot of people say it's made for the grapple, that's fine. But like we said in the first episode, getting past your opponent's danger zone is really important, because how are you supposed to get to the grapple if you got to get past their weapon first? So having some sort of offhand weapon like a buckler, I know you can't really see it because I'm facing this way, but having something like a buckler is a really great way to mitigate their range. Having like a shield mitigates somebody else's range. Simple as that. Now, even though it's smaller technically than the other one, it's not compromised in terms of the grapple. We still can absolutely do all of these strikes. We've got those flick cuts, reverse edge cuts. So like the important takeaway is we haven't compromised any of the inherent design of the BATLETH. This is still completely a BATLETH. We haven't changed it and turned it into a sword. We haven't changed it and turned it into some other weapon. This is still a BATLETH, just a little tiny bit shorter, maybe 10, 15 centimeters. I can't remember what the scalability is. So we haven't compromised any of the functionality of the BATLETH. This is really important to bring up because other people out there, not gonna name any names, when they design their own BATLETHs, they're not BATLETHs. So thought I'd bring that up. Now I'm gonna hit this bottle. Now obviously this isn't gonna be able to cut. This is aluminum, but I've got the BATLETH out here and we've got a bottle, we might as well hit it. Actually, should I use the other one? One of the benefits, like I said, is those flick cuts, right? Because it's a lot more aggressive in the curve as well. When you do those flick cuts, we're getting around a guard, you know, pretend there's a blade there. You're getting around the blade and being able to hit a target. I mean, I know I'm not supposed to be showing you how aggressive this one is, it's just for fun, but it's pretty good, pretty good. You can do a flick cut, but then bringing it back, I can't bring it back quick enough. Whereas something like this, no, there's not a bottle there, but flick cut back, that's what we want. We want to flick cut back, flick cut back. Today's episode is nothing special, nothing crazy. I just wanted to revisit this. Like I said, this was completely an accident. I made it a little bit smaller for like cost-cutting purposes, and it turns out that it actually completely fixes a lot of the gripes. And some of the gripes that it doesn't fix that are inherent with the design, for example, that range, you can have something in your offhand like a buckler or even like a shield. So you kind of fix that problem as well. Now, I'm not going to do a tit score today. We've already done it. Nothing has really changed with the fundamentals of the design, but I would pick this over this one any day. I think it's worth the trade, and I think this actually fixes somewhat the BATLETH design. But that's going to be all. Thank you guys for watching. I genuinely hope you enjoyed today's episode. Just a little bit of a follow-up. Usually I don't do this sort of thing unless there's something actually to talk about. And in this particular case, I thought this was worth bringing up. But that's going to be all. Thanks for watching, guys. Remember to like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below. And as always, I'll see you next week in another episode. Have a good one.